Welcome to another spooky campfire story. Created with AI assistance. So get cozy. Remember, that tingle you feel on the back of your neck, maybe it's not just a chill breeze.
It was supposed to be a weekend for reconnecting and reminiscing under the familiar glow of our campfire. Just me, Jess, Scott, Amy, and the countless twinkling stars overhead that had witnessed our laughter and bonding on this annual trip so many times before. We could never have imagined this year would end in such heart-stopping terror, or that only one of us would return home, destined to never be believed. We came from two different worlds, the countryside where I was raised by my father, and the wealthy suburbs where the others grew up as close friends. But a shared middle school biology class was enough to spark a special connection, one nurtured by countless camping retreats out under the whispering pines together over the past decade. By now, we were as comfortable together as any lifelong friends. The time and distance between yearly meetups vanishing instantly when we would first glimpse each other fumbling to set up tents as smiles creased our faces. Sunset was spent catching up on life and downing a few beers as wisps of campfire smoke swirled overhead, sharing memories, dreams, and our world-solving philosophies. These can only be found perched on musty logs with a stomach full of s'mores under a galaxy of stars. But this time, there was a heaviness I couldn't shake as I gazed at the eager faces of my friends across the flickering blaze. A slight autumn chill seemed to hang in the night air despite the fire. An uneasy darkness settled around us, rather than the familiar, cozy blanket of pine and wood smoke that usually accompanied our annual pilgrimage to the Blackwood Forest campgrounds. I tried brushing it off as lingering anxiety from nearly crashing my battered old pickup truck along the winding, mountainous roads just to make it there. But when Scott suggested capping off the night by sharing spooky stories like when we were kids, my mouth went dry looking out at the night pressed in tightly around our fragile ring of light. The shadows seeming to creep closer, hanging heavily from the rustling branches. I suddenly longed for the comforting glow of the ranger station just a few miles up the road, rather than being immersed in such suffocating darkness. Sensing my hesitation, Amy grabbed my arm playfully, her signature move to get my attention ever since middle school. She had a way about her that radiated warmth, her smile alone able to heal wounds that went soul deep. She reminded me of the flicker of candles in the windowsills of mountain cabins, holding back the night with brave resilience. How could I deny her pleading eyes for a little scary storytelling by the fire? It was tradition after all, even if every cell in my body screamed otherwise, as I begrudgingly nodded my surrender, forcing a smile. Scott dove excitedly into an elaborate and gruesome tale about a long-dead gold miner's ghost that stalks the mountain caves, hungering fiercely for those lost in the tunnels. I could feel eyes on me from the tangled limbs and leaves pressing overhead as Scott unspooled that haunting yarn. At one point, Amy buried her head against my shoulder during a particularly chilling scene, both of us erupting in tension-relieving laughter, much to Scott's theatrical dismay. Maybe this trip would shape up just fine after all, I tried assuring my still buzzing nerves. Eventually, Jess took her turn, masterfully summoning the haunting cries of a banshee with her lilting voice that echoed through the towering pines. Her words, conjuring ghostly wails that raised the small hairs on the back of my neck until I finally had to nervously object for her to stop. We all broke into those familiar fits of giggling over my unease, but something sinister still gnawed at the edges of our temporary mirth. Furtive shadows that twisted between the trees before darting out of sight. As the last embers faded amongst the crackling sparks rising hazily into the night sky, I reluctantly volunteered to be the first to turn in, the day's drive still clinging like cobwebs to my exhausted body and mind. I left the others to their stifled chuckling over my early retreat, their remaining beers surely to carry hushed conversations between old friends for a few hours more, I figured, before blissful and uneventful slumber settled us all in for the evening. Would that it had gone that way. I awoke violently a few hours later to the thunderous flapping of my tent walls in the icy wind. In my disorientation, I figured a branch had come crashing down from overhead, threatening to collapse my temporary nylon home. My hands grasped desperately in the blackness for the flashlight I keep secured by the opening when camping. The dim radiance barely pierced the oppressive dark as I fumbled with the stubborn zipper, hoping everyone else weathered the commotion all right. Stepping out cautiously, I was instead met with a scene from my absolute darkest nightmares. The campsite utterly abandoned, various items scattered chaotically across muddy, matted grass. Tents were ripped open and billowing in the wind, which carried the unmistakable iron scent of blood, mingling nauseatingly with pine needles and smoke. "Guys, where are you?" I croaked, throat closing around my voice in cold terror, as only the creaking trees answered with their own menacing whispers from above. I stumbled through that nightmare vista of overturned logs and flapping tents screaming their names, tears blinding me as I became tangled in loose fabric and branches that seemed to reach out and grab my ankles. My wide beam revealed only the looming silhouettes of an impenetrable tree line and the frantic movement of swift four-legged shadows darting just out of sight between the monstrous trunks. Exhausted and ready to scream myself hoarse into that deafening maelstrom, I slumped against a towering pine off the side of the main site to catch my breath. When I saw them, crude symbols etched along its surface that certainly hadn't been there in daylight hours. Fresh sap oozed down from their edges, reflecting the crimson light of my flashlight ominously. Somewhere out in that lightless chaos, something moved, a tree branch cracking under sudden weight. I gasped and spun my light frantically toward the sound, revealing a fleeting glimpse of an emaciated, elongated face peering out behind the nearest tree. Black sockets trained on me. Paralyzed by the sight, my mind reeled, trying to make sense of those terrible features as they swiftly receded back into shadow. A guttural clicking echoed from all sides before the attack came. Sinewy arms exploded from the forest floor to grab at my ankles while I was still frozen in shock. Rotted leaves and moist soil cascaded over me as my body hit the ground violently from their forceful tug. Kicking desperately, my numb hands barely found a downed branch thick enough to defend myself with. I flailed at those horrific limbs as more and more of the fiendish gnarled claws grasped from the widening pit just below ground. With each swipe of the makeshift weapon, I found my breath quickening to hyperventilation. The crunches and inhuman shrieks ripping through once humanoid forms, spurring utter horror and adrenaline. Their savage strength was too much as my body slid closer to that abyss from which they emerged. With a final prayer, I closed my eyes, ready to surrender myself to their sediment-crusted fate. Only, nothing came. No more hands, no more infernal calls to join them in shadow. Slowly opening my eyes amid frantic breaths, the woods met my widened gaze with only silence, gentle rain beginning to filter down through patches of starlit sky. I sat there paralyzed against the bark for what felt like hours, waiting for the attack to renew with greater fury. But there was peace. Had it all been some kind of twisted, vivid dream? But the symbols and clawed earth at my feet cut against that desperate rationalization. When the morning songbirds tentatively emerged to greet the dawn's soft light, filtering green and gold through the leaves above me, I staggered to my feet. Every inch of my being coursing with the desire to flee that cursed place and never glimpse its ancient bark or bed of pine needles again. Absently, I grasped at my neck, seeking comfort in the ornate tree of life pendant Amy had gifted me on our high school graduation trip together. My stomach dropped, finding it missing, but escape outweighed further investigation. I lurched into daybreak towards the distant ranger station for help, vows of silence sealed behind my lips as to what I had witnessed there under starlight. For I knew none would believe me, just as I feel your curious skepticism even now, though my haunted eyes reflect every moment of that woeful starlit terror as clear and true as a mountain stream.